Jasmine Crockett just made the biggest mistake of her political career. She walked into a church during Charlie Kirk's funeral and called him a purveyor of hate, a catastrophic misstep. But she didn't expect Karoline Leavitt to stand up and confront her, a young woman whose single sentence could shift the entire room. What silenced hundreds of people and left America holding its breath for those 5 fateful seconds? Why did a 6-month-old letter have the power to crush Jasmine's career right in front of everyone? And why, after that night, did the nation start talking about truth as if it were a new religion? Hit like and brace yourself, because what you're about to hear isn't just a debate, but the moment a nation faced its own conscience. The church in Robbinsdale, Minnesota was so quiet you could hear a pin drop. Hundreds of people sat close together under the faint glow of golden candles, eyes fixed on a large photo of Charlie Kirk, his youthful face, bright smile, surrounded by white flowers. No one spoke. No one moved. Only the breath of unhealed grief lingered. Then came the sound of heels clicking on the wooden floor. The church door opened, and Jasmine Crockett stepped in. Her bright red suit blazed in the mournful space, the light reflecting off her glasses, making it seem like she was stepping off a political stage, not into a memorial service. People exchanged glances. Some bowed their heads. Others grimaced. As she stepped up to the pulpit, the microphone let out a faint buzz, and in a voice calm to the point of chilling, Jasmine said, "We shouldn't sanctify someone who spent their life sowing division. Hate cannot be buried with the dead." A collective gasp. All eyes turned to her. The elderly pastor gripped his Bible tightly. Charlie's mother covered her mouth, tears spilling. Jasmine pressed on, her gaze defiant. He taught America's youth how to fear, not how to love. Her words landed like a heavy stone in a still lake. From the third row, a voice rose, low but resolute. "Enough." The entire church turned. A blonde woman stood, Karoline Leavitt. She carried no papers, no cameras, only a Bible in her hand. The light streaming through the stained glass window bathed her shoulders in a faint blue glow. "If you teach love by insulting the dead," Karoline said slowly, "then maybe I'm looking at the wrong definition of love." The wind whistled through the door's cracks. No one spoke another word. Jasmine faltered slightly, frowning. "I have the right to speak the truth." Karoline stepped out from the pew, her shoes echoing steadily. "And I have the right to remind you that truth isn't a weapon to stab into someone's heart." The two women faced each other in the church, one in blazing red, the other in simple black, one with eyes burning with pride, the other with a gaze calm to the point of chilling. It felt as if all of America, its two opposing halves, was standing in that room, holding its breath. The air grew so heavy that everyone knew what had just begun wouldn't end with mere words. A confrontation had ignited, right in the house of faith. Karoline walked slowly between the pews, each step resounding in the thick silence. Eyes followed her, not because they knew who she was, but because they sensed something in her approach. Calm, not angry, but weighty. When she stopped a few steps from the pulpit, the light from the stained glass hit her blonde hair, casting a faint halo like in an old painting. Jasmine Crockett looked down from the pulpit, smirking. "Oh, there you are, Karoline Leavitt, the new Republican star. I suppose you're here to defend your friend, right?" Her voice was sweet but bitter, laced with the sarcasm of someone who believed they held power. Karoline didn't answer immediately. She let the silence speak, then said softly, "Oh, I'm not here to defend anyone. I'm here to ask you one question." Jasmine crossed her arms, smirking faintly. "Go ahead and ask." Karoline looked up, her gaze sharp. "Have you ever spoken to Charlie, even once, before calling him hate?" A flicker of hesitation crossed Jasmine's face. She glanced away, then answered quickly, "I don't need to talk to someone to know who they are. I know his type." Karoline tilted her head slightly, her eyes never leaving her opponent. "Interesting," she said quietly, "but clearly, because in my experience, people only hate what they don't understand." The church froze. A few people in the front rows nodded subtly. Jasmine tried to mask her discomfort with a half smile. "I'm not here for a philosophical debate, Miss Leavitt. I'm talking about reality, about what this man caused." Karoline replied, "Reality? I have a reality to share too." She paused, her voice steady and low. 3 years ago, I debated Charlie on TV. We disagreed and I left that day feeling bitter. But a few days later, he called me, just to say one thing. "We're different, but I respect you for standing up." Her words fell into the cold space, like a small flame igniting the hearts of those listening. Karoline looked around the room. I was once his opponent, but even though we didn't see eye to eye, he never called me an enemy. Her eyes returned to Jasmine. But you, Jasmine, you never met him, yet you're ready to use his funeral to call him hate. I wonder, who are you really talking about? Him or yourself? A soft wow escaped from the back. The pastor bowed his head, murmuring a prayer. Jasmine took a deep breath, trying to regain her momentum. I'm saying what many think but don't dare say. She shot back. Charlie Kirk promoted ideas that divided this country. He stood for fear. Karoline didn't budge, her eyes still blazing. If he stood for fear, then why were you afraid to talk to him when he was alive? A long silence. Jasmine bit her lip. She felt every gaze pressing down on her. For the first time, her political confidence offered no shield. Karoline continued, her voice soft but sharp as a blade. You walked into a church, among grieving people, and thought your cleverness gave you the right to insult them. But maybe you forgot that intelligence, without compassion, is just arrogance, dressed as reason. Jasmine blinked rapidly, her forced smile fading. Who do you think you are, Karoline? Some kind of savior angel? Karoline shook her head slightly. No, I'm just someone standing between light and dark, trying to remind you that this isn't a podium, and you're not speaking to an audience. You're speaking before God, before a mother who lost her son, and before your own conscience. Her voice dropped, almost a whisper. If you want to call someone hateful, make sure your heart isn't carrying hate. No one spoke. The wind blew through the window, stirring the candles before Charlie Kirk's photo, their flickering light casting shadows on Jasmine's face, half bright, half dark. In that moment, everyone understood that the young woman who stood up wasn't just a guest at the service. She stepped out from the shadow of silence, carrying a light that political words couldn't extinguish. Jasmine took a sharp breath, as if trying to swallow her rising frustration. Her eyes scanned the room, searching for a foothold in the deathly silent crowd. Then she spoke, her voice louder, trying to regain control. He attacked black women every day on air. I don't call that faith. The microphone echoed, slightly shrill, but no one responded. Karoline just stood there, still holding her Bible, expressionless. If he was wrong, she replied slowly, prove it with facts, not sarcasm in a church. Jasmine narrowed her eyes, her lips curling into a scornful smile. Facts, huh? She emphasized. Do you know he funded campaigns against black voting rights? How many people lost their voice because of his calls on social media? She paused, hoping her outrage would catch the crowd, but only a faint cough came from the back. Jasmine's eyes flickered with unease. Karoline slowly set her Bible on the pew beside her, then reached into her coat pocket. Everyone held their breath. When she pulled out a neatly folded yellow envelope, the candles around the altar flickered. Karoline stepped toward the pulpit, her voice not loud but carrying far in the absolute silence. I'm guessing you've never seen this. She opened the envelope, pulling out a few sheets of paper, holding them up for all to see. Printed emails with a clear header. Dallas U Scholarship Fund. Charlie Kirk Foundation. Her voice was steady, each word precise. These are scholarships left behind by your enemy. This fund helped minority students in Dallas who couldn't afford tuition. Here are signatures from 3 universities and over 20 recipients. A murmur rose, then spread quickly. A middle-aged man in the front row looked up, saying softly, I heard about that fund. A woman covered her mouth, eyes red. The church buzzed like a soft breeze. Small stories of Charlie helping poor students being recalled. Jasmine stared at the papers in Karoline's hand, breathing heavily. Where did you get that? The question came out reflexively. Karoline answered simply, from the fund's financial manager. I didn't come here to accuse anyone, just to show you that sometimes what you call truth is just pre-written lines for TV. The room erupted. A few clapped softly, unable to hold back. The pastor stood silent, eyes closed, lips moving in prayer. The blue-stained glass light fell on Jasmine's face, making her look pale. She stepped back, still clutching the microphone. Karoline took another half step forward, her voice still soft, but each word heavy as stone. Jasmine, you may not like Charlie, and that's your right, but truth doesn't belong to any side. It's here, in these lines. She held out the envelope, the paper glinting in the light. If you have evidence to the contrary, I'm ready to see it, but show me something real, not rumors. Jasmine pursed her lips. She looked around, searching for an ally, but only saw Charlie's elderly mother staring up at her, not with anger, but with disappointment. That look made Jasmine step back further, her heels clicking faintly on the wooden step with a dry clack. Karoline said nothing more. She placed the envelope on the pulpit, next to Jasmine's microphone, then stepped aside, leaving a void between them. The silence stretched, thick as fog. Jasmine bit her lip, looked down, then up with one last effort. Maybe that fund exists, but it doesn't erase the extremist things he said. Karoline nodded slightly, her eyes softening. True, he may have said things that were wrong, but he also did things that were right. And today, you're not just denying his words, but the people he helped. Her voice was firm, but held no hatred, only something deeper, a sadness mixed with resolve. Jasmine gripped the microphone, about to respond, but her throat caught. The words she meant to say felt meaningless against that envelope, an undeniable testament. She bowed her head, forcing a laugh. You think you can teach me morals? Karoline replied instantly, without hesitation. No, I'm just reminding you that morals don't need teaching, just remembering. The room erupted, not in cheers, but in a collective sigh of relief, as if someone had untied the knot of tension wrapped around their chests. Jasmine stepped back fully, her smile warped. The room's energy had shifted. People looked at Karoline with respect, while Jasmine, though still standing, had lost her footing. In the dim church light, amid flickering candles, a new line was drawn, between those who speak to win and those who speak to preserve truth. Karoline slowly approached the pulpit, placing the envelope in front of Jasmine, the paper's contact with the wood ringing out dry, but heavy as a hammer's strike. Her voice was clear, steady, each word nailing into the floor. You say he sowed hate, but records show he donated over $4 million to inner-city schools in Texas and Illinois. What do you have to prove otherwise? The church fell silent. No one coughed. No one stirred. The flickering candles made Charlie Kirk's photo behind them shimmer, as if watching the exchange. Jasmine paled, sweat beading at her temples. She bent to her bag, rummaging. Papers in disarray. One sheet fell to the floor. She snatched it up, her voice stammering. I heard in a report it said. Karoline didn't wait for her to finish. She cut in, not loudly, her voice low, cold, and sharp. An anonymous report from Twitter, or just whispers you wanted to believe, because they fit your narrative. The question pierced Jasmine's confident facade. The crowd held its breath. A few in the back rows exchanged glances. A soft sob from an older woman broke the silence in the left corner, then faded. Karoline's eyes never left her opponent. You stand here in a church, calling someone hateful, but what are you bringing? Rumors and theatrics. Jasmine looked up, her eyes wavering between anger and confusion. She opened her mouth to retort, but the microphone was no longer her ally. Its echo seemed to betray her. I'm just repeating what I read. Where? Karoline interrupted, softly but firmly. Online, from anonymous accounts. Is that your standard for truth, Congresswoman? A ripple of murmurs spread through the room. No longer a silent audience, they looked at Jasmine differently, with disappointment and shock. The elderly pastor bowed his head, lips moving in prayer. Karoline leaned forward, pointing to the envelope. These are verified documents, signed, stamped with recipients. You call him a purveyor of hate, but he funded the very people you claim to protect. Tell me, Jasmine, do you really believe the words you just said? Jasmine froze. The question choked her. A suffocating silence stretched out. Then, unexpectedly, a man's voice rose from the back row, shaky but clear. I can confirm that. All eyes turned. A young man in a gray shirt stood. He looked around, then straight at Jasmine. I worked in your office in 2022. I handled the donation files you're talking about. The church exploded. Jasmine spun around, her face drained of color. Marcus, she whispered. The man, Marcus, nodded, his voice steadier. I left your office because you never verified information. Charlie Kirk donated. I saw thank you emails from a Dallas inner-city school principal. Did you forget? The room roared. A woman covered her mouth, whispering, My God. The pastor opened his eyes, tears rolling down his cheeks, whispers everywhere. That's her guy. What did he say? Is that true? Jasmine stepped back, clutching the microphone. She looked at Marcus, then the crowd, her eyes darting like a cornered animal. You're lying, she said hoarsely. They paid you, didn't they? Marcus shook his head, his voice calm but bitter. No one paid me. I came here to honor someone who gave me a chance at college when I had nothing but a dream. And today, I see you turning this funeral into a smear. I couldn't stay silent. The words "couldn't stay silent" echoed like thunder in the room. Jasmine dropped the microphone, its crash piercing the air. She touched her forehead, breathing deeply. Karoline didn't move, just stared. "Did you hear that?" she said softly. "Your own person. One of them is speaking the truth. There was no campaign, just a man doing what was right. And you called him hate." Jasmine bowed her head, her hair falling over half her face. In that moment, the image of a sharp, confident politician dissolved, leaving only a trembling woman amid the crowd. The room broke into applause, not loud, but steady, slow, like the heartbeat of the room returning after suffocation. Marcus sat down, eyes red. The pastor stood, his voice shaking. "Today, we've witnessed something rare, truth spoken not with anger, but with evidence." Karoline turned to Jasmine, no longer confrontational. Her voice softened, almost like advice. "Jasmine, truth doesn't need to be pretty to be believed. It just needs to be seen. And today, everyone here has seen it." Jasmine didn't respond. She stepped back. One step, then two. The stained glass light fell on her, red like blood, spreading across the white wall of the cross. She clenched her fist, eyes fixed on the envelope still on the pulpit, as if wanting to say something, but no words came. The room fell silent again, only the soft wind through the candles, their flickering flames reflecting on everyone's faces in that silence. All understood the balance of the confrontation had shifted. No one needed to declare a winner or loser. The evidence had spoken, and in that house of faith, only a raw truth remained. Words cannot save someone who has drained their own well of trust. "This is a setup," Jasmine shouted, her voice sharp and breathless. "You're turning a funeral into a political campaign." The microphone screeched and cut out, as if her control had been yanked away. The church shook, not from the shout, but from the desperation in her voice. The faces in the crowd weren't angry, just heavy with pity. Karoline stood still, unmoving. She tilted her head slightly, her voice calm but cutting. "No, you did that when you called someone hate in a sanctuary." The air thickened. The word sanctuary rang like an accusation. Jasmine spun toward the pastor, seeking an ally, but he only bowed his head, clutching his trembling Bible. Every gaze turned back to her, not from supporters or opponents, but from witnesses to a soul unraveling in a place meant for peace. Karoline stepped forward half a step. Her voice was low, not loud, but filled the space with the natural force of truth. "What are you trying to prove, Jasmine? That you're brave, or that you just need a camera?" Jasmine panted, her eyes scanning the room. The camera lenses still pointed at her, their lights making her look exposed. She raised a finger at Karoline, her voice choked. "You're just playing to your conservative crowd." Karoline smiled, not mocking, but calm. "If this is a performance, at least I'm not the villain." A burst of laughter broke out, then stopped instantly. No one dared break the tension again. All understood this was no longer a political debate, but a public test of character between two people. Jasmine bit her lip, eyes blazing, her voice sharp. "You don't know how I feel. You don't understand what it's like to be insulted for your skin, your gender, your roots. Charlie Kirk and people like him use their platforms to humiliate us." Karoline didn't reply immediately. She let Jasmine's words echo and fade among the candles. Then she spoke softly, almost like a shared confession. "I know what it's like to be hurt, Jasmine, but I've learned that when pain becomes a weapon, it hurts others more than it does you." Her voice lost its debating edge, carrying the tone of empathy, making many bow their heads. A black woman in the left row nodded slowly, tears rolling down her cheeks. Jasmine saw the reaction, growing more unsettled. "Don't pretend to be compassionate," she snapped. "You don't know what I've had to hear about Charlie Kirk for years. I have reasons to hate him." Karoline spoke softly. "Maybe, but reasons don't give you the right to insult someone in God's house. Hatred isn't evidence. And today, all you've brought is hatred." Her words struck the air like a slap. Jasmine flinched, gripping the microphone tightly, her voice trembling. "I'm not the only one who thinks this way." "True," Karoline replied, "but you're the only one saying it here in front of his parents, in front of people praying for his soul." Those words hit Jasmine like a bucket of cold water. She turned to the front row, where Charlie's mother sat. The woman was crying, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Jasmine opened her mouth, but no words came. Her lips quivered slightly, Karoline looked at her, her gaze no longer cold, but quiet and resolute. Jasmine, you may not realize it, but this isn't about Charlie anymore. This is about you, about how you face the truth. When you call someone hateful without knowing who they are, you're not fighting for justice. You're trying to prove you're right at all costs. A gust of wind blew through, making the candle before the altar flicker. The light shimmered on their faces, one radiant, the other weary. Karoline turned to the crowd, her voice ringing out, soft but sharp. We can be different. We can argue, but never bring arrogance into a sacred place. God doesn't need winners of arguments, only those who are honest. The room fell deathly silent. No one clapped, but the atmosphere shifted entirely. Jasmine stood there, trembling, her eyes unfocused. She tried to fight back one last time, her voice choked. You talk like you're so holy. Karoline lowered her head slightly, replying softly, I'm not holy. I'm just trying not to turn faith into a tool to hurt others. Those words made people see her differently. Karoline's calm wasn't defensive anymore. It became strength. Jasmine, on the other hand, flailed deeper in her own anger. She threw the paper in her hand to the ground, the sound of it hitting the floor dry and harsh. I don't need anyone teaching me morals. Karoline looked at her for a long moment, then said softly, almost a whisper, maybe that's exactly why you've lost them. A small "oh" escaped from the back row. Jasmine froze, her eyes wide, her lips trembled, but she had no words left to counter. The room became so quiet, you could hear the faint crackle of the candles. People felt something shifting. The confrontation had moved from politics to a judgment of conscience. No one said it, but everyone knew, from that moment, this battle was no longer equal. Karoline took a step up the wooden platform, the distance between them now just a few meters. The light from the high stained glass window behind the altar poured down, slanting across her shoulder, casting a band of vivid blue across her blonde hair. Her voice was low, soft, without a trace of harshness. Jasmine, have you ever considered that what you call hate is sometimes just fear reflected back? The question fell like a drop of water in the cold, dry room. Jasmine frowned briefly, but her proud smile had crumbled. She tried to reclaim her stance as a congresswoman, lifting her chin, her voice trembling slightly. I'm not afraid of anything. Karoline tilted her head, a sad smile crossing her face. Really? You're afraid of being remembered as the one who insulted the dead? That's the truest fear. The room was utterly still. Every breath was audible. The scent of candle wax mixed in the air, sharp and warm. The stained glass light shifted with the clouds outside, deep red fading to soft hues, falling on Jasmine's face, every anxious feature starkly visible, the slight twitch of her mouth, her eyes darting as if searching for an escape. Karoline didn't need to step closer. Her strength wasn't in proximity, but in silence. She spoke, her voice still soft but sharp enough to tear through the facade of calm. You know the cruelest thing isn't what you said, but that you didn't know to stay silent when you should have. In some places, silence is enough to show respect. Today, you walked in and lost that. Jasmine opened her mouth, but no one wanted to hear anymore. They looked at her, not with anger, but with a cold gaze, like watching someone dig their own grave. She lowered the microphone, forcing a smile. You think you understand me. You don't know what I've had to fight to be here. I've been looked down on my whole life. Karoline nodded slowly. I know, but you can't use your wounds to cut into someone else's pain. A middle-aged woman in the front row nodded faintly, tears falling. The entire church was silent. The clock on the wall ticked loudly, chillingly clear. Jasmine gripped the microphone tightly, her voice rising, almost a shout. I don't need anyone's forgiveness. I don't need the fake applause of this conservative crowd. Karoline remained unmoved. She looked straight at Jasmine, saying softly, No one wants you to apologize, Jasmine. They just want you to see who you've hurt. The words were like a small knife, bloodless but piercing to the heart. Jasmine stepped back, her hand trembling. From the front row, Charlie's mother looked up, her eyes red, lips pressed tight to hold back sobs. The pastor lifted his head, his trembling hands closing the Bible. Karoline continued, her voice not loud, but ringing like iron bells.
You came here carrying flames you thought were justice.
But justice doesn't burn on the fuel of resentment. Jasmine breathed heavily, lowering the microphone to the table, her eyes locked on Karoline. You're lecturing me? She said, her voice hoarse. Karoline took another half step, paused, lowered her head slightly, her voice dropping.
I'm holding a mirror up with you. We're all human.
But the difference is, when I see I'm wrong, I stop. You keep talking until no one wants to listen. Those words chilled the room further. Jasmine blinked rapidly, trying to hide the tear in her eye. She looked around. The crowd before her was no longer voters, no longer an audience to persuade. They were just grieving people seeking peace. And she realized she was the one who had ripped that peace away. From the back row, Marcus, her former staffer, stood silently, head bowed. He no longer held his phone, only clenched his fists, as if praying she'd stop speaking. But Jasmine pressed on. I didn't mean to offend. I just wanted to speak the truth. Karoline shook her head lightly. Truth doesn't need to shout. You shout because you're afraid no one will hear. But today, you're the one who hasn't heard anything. Those words silenced every other sound. Everyone bowed their heads. Even those who once supported Jasmine no longer dared to look up. The light from the stained glass shifted, turning to a soft white, shining directly on the pulpit. Jasmine's face was stark under that light. No longer confident, no longer proud, just a woman realizing the consequences of her own words. Karoline stood still. She didn't press the attack. She let the silence finish the job. No one in the room needed more explanation. The mask of confidence, morality, and courage Jasmine wore throughout the service was cracking apart. And those pieces didn't fall to the floor, but in the eyes of the hundreds watching her, reflecting her, mirroring the fear Karoline had just named. Jasmine bowed her head low. She didn't know where to look. Every eye was like a mirror, reflecting the image she'd created. From the back row, a teenager stood, saying softly, "All right, let her rest." But no one reacted. No one needed rest. The fight had ended in silence, and the loser had claimed defeat with wet eyes. Karoline returned to her seat, walking past the long pews. She said nothing more, didn't look back. As she sat, the light from the highest stained glass window fell on Charlie's photo, and for the first time that service, his smile seemed brighter. No shouting needed. Karoline had claimed the room, and in that room, everyone knew a truth had emerged. Truth never needs a weapon, only the courage to speak it. Jasmine swallowed hard, trying to steady her breath, then suddenly looked up. Her voice was hoarse but forceful, like someone rising after being cornered. He wasn't innocent. I have proof he funded far-right groups. Her voice echoed through the church, stirring a portion of the room from its silence. A few raised eyebrows, a few exchanged glances, faces mixed with curiosity and doubt. Karoline, still seated in the pew, arms crossed, her gaze unwavering. She tilted her head, her voice calm to the point of chilling. "Show it." The simple words cut like a blade. No anger, just the absolute confidence of someone who knew their opponent was about to wound themselves. Jasmine pulled out her phone, her fingers trembling slightly, the screen's light reflecting on her face, pale with tension. She scrolled through folders, sweat beading at her temples. Each swipe made a faint beep, like a countdown. The crowd was deathly silent. "Here," she exclaimed, opening a PDF titled Donations to Patriot Frontier Initiative. The screen showed a blurry ledger, some numbers, some initials. Jasmine held the phone high, her voice shaky but trying to hold authority. "This is a financial record I got from a close source in the Treasury Department. Charlie Kirk sent $250,000 to a far-right organization. How do you explain that?" Karoline stood, walking toward the pulpit, her eyes never leaving the phone screen. "All right," she said softly. "Let me see." Jasmine hesitated but stepped forward, holding the screen toward Karoline. She thought this moment would turn the tide, that one line of numbers could reclaim her lost credibility. But as Karoline looked down, her eyes narrowed. 1 second, 2 seconds. Then she looked up, her gaze icy. "Jasmine," she said slowly, "I'm guessing you didn't know that Congress's independent fact-checking body labeled this file fake 8 months ago." Jasmine froze. "What?" Karoline raised a hand, signaling her to stop. That file came from an anonymous online account. It was edited by replacing Fellowship Program with Frontier Initiative. That same day, journalists verified it was fake. It's listed in the False Political Claims database. You can check it now. I've got the original. Karoline pulled her phone from her pocket, opened the browser, and with a few taps, the screen showed bold red text. Document flagged as fraudulent. Source, Fact check independent. April 2024. She turned the screen for the entire room to see. The red text was like a knife, slashing through Jasmine's final effort. No one spoke. A few in the crowd leaned forward to see better. An elderly man whispered to his neighbor, "My God, it's really fake." The whispers spread like wind through a wheat field, swift and final. Jasmine suddenly looked smaller than ever. She forced a smile. "You're lying." Maybe someone edited it back. Karoline didn't raise an eyebrow, just leaned forward slightly, her voice soft but hard as steel. "You just proved you don't verify your sources. Thank you for being honest." The words plunged the room into absolute silence. No coughs, no shifting chairs. Everyone felt the moment that had just unfolded, the moment someone lost their credibility not through accusation, but by exposing their own carelessness. In the front row, Charlie's mother, the woman who had sat quietly throughout, let out a long sigh. The sound was soft, but carried to the back of the room. It wasn't a sigh of triumph, but of sorrow released. Jasmine heard it, and that sound made her tremble. She turned, looking at the woman. Her eyes held no hatred, no resentment, just something that forced Jasmine to lower her head. Pity. She lowered the phone, its screen still glowing in her hand, but her fingers no longer had the strength to press a single button. The blue light from the screen illuminated her face, reflecting panicked, tear-blurred eyes. Karoline said nothing more. She simply looked at Jasmine, letting the truth spread like a wave. No more arguments were needed. Everything had been said by a single line of red text. Marcus, the former staffer, sat in the back, head bowed, hands clasped, as if in prayer. A few others nodded slowly, not necessarily because they supported Karoline, but because they knew the right thing had prevailed without needing applause. Jasmine swallowed, her throat dry. She tried to say something, but her voice choked. The microphone in her hand felt heavy, like a stone. Every eye was on her, not with curiosity or anger anymore, but with the silence of those witnessing a soul's collapse. Karoline stepped onto the pulpit, not touching Jasmine, only speaking softly, almost a whisper. "You didn't need fake evidence. If you wanted to point out Charlie's flaws, you could have found real ones, but you chose the easier path, and that's exactly what brought you down." Those final words were like snuffing out a candle. A candle near the altar flickered out, leaving a thin wisp of smoke curling upward, lingering in the dim light. Someone in the audience stood instinctively, removing their hat, bowing their head, a small gesture, but like a ritual of closure. Jasmine looked around, her lips trembling. I didn't mean," but no one responded. Only the sound of the wind outside the window and the faint rustle of dry leaves on the floor remained. She bowed her head, dropping the phone onto the table, its screen flickering before going dark. The room remained lit, but the light no longer belonged to her. Karoline stepped back, looking up at Charlie Kirk's photo behind the pulpit. The smile in the picture seemed warmer, clearer, as if he were watching it all and forgiving everything. No one declared a winner or loser, but everyone knew the battle was over, not with rhetoric, not with anger, but with two simple words: the truth. Karoline stood still on the pulpit, hands clasped in front of her. The air in the church was thick, as if the whole world were holding its breath. The light through the stained glass windows stretched across the wooden floor, touching the half-burned candles, casting everything in a deep golden hue. She looked at Jasmine, who stood frozen with empty hands, then slowly reached into her coat pocket. When Karoline pulled out a small worn envelope with yellowed edges, the audience leaned forward as one. Charlie's mother looked up, her hand clutching her rosary tightly. Karoline's voice was soft but carried far. "He sent this to me 6 months before he died." Even Jasmine's breathing stopped. Karoline opened the envelope, each movement slow and reverent, as if unveiling a sacred relic. The paper crinkled, softened by time. She looked down at the familiar slanted handwriting and began to read, her voice trembling slightly at first. "If one day I'm gone, tell them I only wanted young people to dare to speak the truth, even if they hate hearing it." Her reading paused, the silence letting each word sink into the wooden floor, piercing the hearts tightening in the room. In the front row, Charlie's mother pressed a handkerchief to her mouth, a soft sob escaping. The pastor closed his eyes, tears spilling from his aged eyes. The entire room was utterly silent, with only the faint whistle of wind through the window. Jasmine stared at the floor, her clasped hands trembling. She could no longer find her voice. In the soft light, her face was pale, the confident features gone. She looked at the letter in Karoline's hand, her eyes dazed, as if seeing something beyond the concepts of right and wrong she used to shield herself. She said faintly, her voice dreamlike. I didn't know. He thought like that. Karoline looked up. The light from the stained glass made her eyes blaze, not with victory, but with sadness and understanding. She replied, slowly and firmly, because you never wanted to know. Those words weren't dramatic, didn't strike or stab, but the entire room trembled. It was like the heavy strike of a hammer on metal, low, slow, and echoing endlessly. People listened, unable to breathe. Several in the back rows stood instinctively. Charlie's mother placed a hand on her chest, sobbing softly, then nodded. Jasmine stepped back, her eyes wide. She wanted to argue, but her throat was dry. No argument held up anymore. She realized everything she'd said before. Her accusations, her evidence, all crumbled before a small piece of paper, before the real handwriting of a man she'd never tried to see beyond her prejudice. Karoline folded the letter, placing it on the pulpit, her hands trembling slightly but resolute. This isn't a defense of Charlie, she said, but a message for all of us. Truth doesn't need to please the ear. It just needs to be spoken. He wasn't perfect, but he was honest, and that's something you never chose to believe. Jasmine shook her head weakly, as if unwilling to hear more, but no one rescued her from that moment. Everyone watched, not with disdain, but with eyes that forced her to face herself. She breathed heavily, rubbing her forehead, her hair disheveled. She began, but the words dissolved mid-sentence, lost in the silence. Karoline didn't press further, didn't need to. She looked at Jasmine, her voice softening. No one's asking you to love him, but when you chose to insult the dead, you made yourself blind to compassion. You didn't want to know the truth, because knowing would hurt your ego. A child in the back row started crying, the small sound carrying strangely far. The mother bent down to comfort them, and the adult's sobs spread. The pastor nodded faintly, his voice choked. God says the truth will set us free, but before it frees us, it will make us hurt. Jasmine trembled, as if hearing herself in those words. She looked up, scanning the room, where every eye reflected the image she'd tried to project. Now in those eyes, she saw only disappointment and pity. No audience, no enemies, just her standing before the consequences of her own arrogance. Karoline gently pushed the letter toward Jasmine. You should read it, she said, not to forgive, but to understand that people can be wrong, but no one deserves to be slandered in their final moment. Jasmine didn't reach out. She only stared at the letter, her eyes locked on it. A tear slid down her cheek, and she wiped it quickly, but not fast enough. No one laughed. No one blamed. The entire room simply watched her, a woman who came to accuse, now judged by the truth. Karoline stepped down from the pulpit, each step echoing softly, like the final punctuation of a verdict. As she passed the front row, Charlie's mother grabbed her hand, eyes wet. Thank you. You let them hear his voice again. Karoline bowed her head, replying softly, it wasn't me, it was him speaking. Behind, Jasmine remained still, her hands clenched, released, then clenched again. On the pulpit, the letter lay there, its faded yellow edges glinting in the last light of the afternoon, like a silent witness. And in that moment, no one in the church doubted who was right or wrong, for the truth had stepped forward, simple, needing no rhetoric, no defense, just a piece of paper and one sentence. I only wanted young people to dare to speak the truth, even if they hate hearing it. Jasmine stared at the letter on the pulpit, her eyes torn between fear and anger. A second of silence passed. Then she blurted out her final words, like a drowning person grasping at straw. That letter could be fake. Her words echoed through the room, but they lacked the force of a counterattack. They sounded more like a desperate plea. A few in the crowd looked up, others sighed softly. No one believed the defense anymore, but every eye turned to Karoline, waiting to see how she'd respond. Karoline stood still, hands clasped, her face calm. She didn't need to look at the letter again. Her voice was steady, clear. Really? Because I have a witness. His mother. Murmurs erupted across the room. All eyes turned to the front row, where the silver-haired woman sat through the service. her hand still clutching her rosary. Charlie's mother looked up, eyes wet, her small shoulders trembling faintly. She stood. The air in the church seemed to stop. A candle near the pulpit flickered out, leaving a thin wisp of white smoke curling around the soft golden light. She stepped forward, each step slow, her hand gripping the back of a pew for balance. Everyone was silent. Jasmine's eyes widened, her lips moving, but unable to make a sound. When she drew near, her voice was hoarse with age and tears. I wrote the last part of that letter with my son. No one breathed. A soft "oh" rose from the back row, then faded, swallowed by the silence. The mother stood beside Karoline, her eyes fixed on Jasmine, not with resentment or anger, but with the quiet strength of a mother who'd lost her son yet held on to dignity. She continued, her voice choked. He knew many didn't understand him. He said, "Mom, if they hate me, that's fine, as long as they hear the truth before they decide." Then he asked me to write the last line. I wrote it with him. Her final words dissolved into a sob. The room erupted. A few people cried. Others stood, hands on their hearts. Some clasped their hands in prayer. The light through the stained glass fell, making the mother's shoulders glow in the sunset. Jasmine nearly collapsed. She gripped the edge of the pulpit to keep from falling. All strength in her seemed to dissolve. She looked at the mother, then at Karoline. The calm faces of both women before her made her feel small, pitiable. Her lips trembled, trying to say something, but no one wanted to hear more. She repeated weakly, like a murmur, I didn't know." Charlie's mother didn't look at her, but turned to Karoline. She touched the young woman's shoulder lightly, her voice shaking but clear. "Thank you for keeping his promise." That moment felt like the room exploded. Applause broke out, not to celebrate a victory, but to honor honesty, humanity. The pastor bowed his head, tears streaming down his face. Marcus, Jasmine's former staffer, sobbed. A woman in the middle row knelt, hands covering her face. Karoline stood silent, not responding immediately. She placed her hand on the mother's frail one, bowing deeply. "I only did what he taught me, ma'am," she said, her voice choked. "Never let the truth be buried, not even for a day." Charlie's mother nodded, her eyes kind, but steeped in loss. "My son wasn't perfect," she said, "but he didn't hate anyone. He only feared this world would forget honesty." Those words made the church feel sacred, no one daring to move. Karoline turned to Jasmine, not with triumph or anger. She just looked straight, as if to say, "Now do you see?" Jasmine looked up, tears streaming, mascara smearing her cheeks. She could no longer speak. She stared at the letter, now neatly placed back on the pulpit by the mother's hand. The paper was no longer just paper. It was a witness. The voice of the man she'd tried to drown with venomous words. A sacred silence enveloped the room. No one dared break it. Karoline stepped back, letting the mother stand beside her son's photo. The light fell on her face, her wrinkles like the flow of time, both painful and beautiful. Finally, she touched the photo's frame lightly, whispering, "Shh, they heard you, Charlie. They heard you." Shh. Jasmine pulled out a tissue, trying to wipe her tears, but they kept smearing. She turned away, unable to bear the gazes around her. The excuses, the speeches she'd rehearsed in the mirror, all vanished. Here, among people weeping for a real person, she felt lost, like an actor forgotten mid-script, in a play she directed herself. Karoline placed a hand on the mother's shoulder, guiding her back to the front row. As they passed, Jasmine avoided her gaze, but couldn't escape her voice, soft, yet piercing every pew. No one should use another's pain to prove they're right. Those words were the final nail. All resistance in Jasmine crumbled completely. She sat, head in her hands, sobbing. No one mocked. No one spoke. Only her cries echoed with the wind through the window, like a prayer gone astray in a service already ended. Karoline turned to the audience, bowing slightly. No one commanded it, but everyone stood as one. The creak of wooden pews rose in unison, not chaotic, but solemn, as if the entire church were bowing to the sacred moment that had just unfolded. Those 5 seconds of silence lingered, like a moment outside time. Someone sobbed. Someone whispered, "Amen." A young boy looked up at his mother, asking softly, "Mom, did she tell the truth?" The mother bent down, replying quietly, "It doesn't matter who told the truth, Just know who stayed silent when the truth appeared. Jasmine sat, hands covering her face. Everything around her blurred, her choked sobs mixing with the ticking of the wall clock, marking the final beats of the afternoon. The light slowly faded from the stained glass, leaving a soft shadow over her disheveled hair. Karoline stood, eyes toward the altar. In the silence, she whispered, unclear if it was a prayer or just a thought. People don't lose when they're opposed. They lose when they refuse to face the truth. The pastor stepped forward, his voice choked but resonant. We will pray for the departed and for those lost in anger to find their way back to the light. The entire room bowed their heads. Those 5 fateful seconds had passed, but their echo lingered in the air, a thin, invisible red line separating lies from truth. Jasmine looked up through tears, seeing Karoline step back to the pews, her eyes glowing with peace. She understood that what she'd lost wasn't just her reputation, but her own faith in herself. And the cruelest part was that it vanished in silence, without a single accusation. As the prayer ended, a candle suddenly went out, white smoke curling upward, before disappearing into the air. 5 seconds, just those 5 seconds, were enough to bury a career and redeem a truth. The church was empty. The long wooden pews still held the warmth of those who had left, but now only one figure remained in the back row, Jasmine. The afternoon light fell through the stained glass window, casting patches of light and shadow on her face. On the wall, the silver cross reflected the flickering candlelight, and she stared at it as if searching for an excuse, a judgment, or at least someone willing to hear her. The clock ticked slowly. Jasmine placed a hand on her chest, feeling her heart still beating, but its rhythm was no longer steady. In her mind, the words she'd spoken, the voices of dissent, the sighs of the crowd replayed like a slow-motion film. Each sentence she'd thrown at the audience returned, vivid and clear, sounding like confessions. Hatred cannot be buried with the dead, he taught the youth to fear. I have proof. Now every word became a hammer striking her own heart. Jasmine bowed her head, hands cradling her forehead. No audience, no cameras, no slogans remained. Only her, alone with the echo of her collapse. She thought of the years spent fighting to be heard, the times she was belittled for her skin and gender. She had vowed never to let anyone silence her. But now, silence itself was the verdict she couldn't escape. No one stood by her, not even her own conscience. She heard the door open in the distance. Not reporters, not comforters. It was Karoline, leaving the church with Charlie's mother. They walked slowly, saying nothing, only the fading daylight embracing them. Reporters waiting outside rushed forward, raising microphones. But Karoline gently raised a hand, signaling them to stop. Her voice was tired but firm. No statements. I didn't come to win, only to make someone be silent. Charlie's mother looked at her, eyes wet with tears. You did it, Karoline. She's silent now. Karoline shook her head slightly. Not her. The noise this world makes when it forgets compassion. The mother placed a hand on her shoulder, trembling but warm. They embraced in the fading light, no divide left between the grieving and the hopeful. The setting sun retreated, gilding their hair. From a distance, the reporters lowered their cameras, some bowing their heads. They understood that what had just happened wasn't sensational news, but a moment when humanity faced itself. Inside, Jasmine remained seated. From where she sat, she saw the 2 figures outside, small against the blazing orange sky. She knew her fight was over, and strangely, in that silence, she felt no more hatred, only a vast emptiness where she had to find a way to keep living. She stood, walking toward the cross. Her trembling hand touched the cold wood. In a fleeting moment, she closed her eyes, whispering, not a prayer, but an admission. I spoke wrong. Her voice dissolved into the wind, unheard by anyone. But perhaps the old church walls heard. Outside, Karoline glanced back. Through the open door, she saw Jasmine's solitary figure before the cross. She didn't smile, didn't look away. Perhaps somewhere, Charlie himself was seeing this. A woman who had insulted him now, standing with her head bowed in the place where he was once prayed for. Karoline turned, guiding the elderly mother toward the car. The sunset stretched across the stone path. Each step left a soft echo, steady, like a heartbeat finding balance after a long, stormy day. Inside the church, Jasmine sat again, looking at the cross one last time. She knew from now on, her name would be tied to that moment, the 5 fateful seconds that buried her career. But she also knew it was a lesson she'd carry for life. A lesson no one taught, only the truth, at its heaviest price. The door closed behind Karoline. The sunset's light retreated from the steps, leaving only darkness inside the church and the shadow of a woman with her regrets. Outside, the wind blew through the trees, soft as a whisper. Silence can also be repentance. She bowed her head, hands clasped tightly. The image of Karoline and Charlie's elderly mother flashed in her mind, their eyes no longer angry, but full of sorrow. That hurt more than any insult. She had thought herself strong, that being right was enough. But now, she realized, strength isn't in a loud voice, but in knowing when to be silent, and she had lost that. On the table, her phone buzzed incessantly. Messages, calls flashing, colleagues, reporters, those who once cheered her. She looked at the screen, but didn't open it. She understood now that no words from outside mattered anymore. The silence of the night was the heaviest verdict she had to face. She reached for a small silver lighter, watching the weak blue flame dance before her eyes. Its light reflected on her face, illuminating 2 streams of tears. She spoke softly, almost a whisper. I just wanted them to hear me, but I didn't hear them. Her words fell, light as a breath, then vanished. Elsewhere, in the Robbinsdale church, Karoline sat in the quiet space. At the altar, small candles still burned, their warm golden light spreading through the room. She placed a hand on the cross, eyes closed, whispering, Truth doesn't need to shout. Her words blended into the still air like a prayer. The candlelight flickered on her face, tired but serene. Karoline didn't think of victory or satisfaction. She only felt relief that what needed to be said had finally been spoken. She smiled faintly, her gaze lifting to Charlie's photo on the altar. You did it, she said softly. They heard you. The wind outside the porch grew stronger, making the candles sway, casting her shadow on the white wall. The shadow flickered, fragile but steady, like a symbol of strength that needed no power, only honesty. On the other side of the city, Jasmine stood by a window, looking down at the empty street. Streetlights stretched into faint golden lines. She pressed her hand against the cold glass, her breath leaving a fleeting mist. In her heart, she knew she couldn't go back. But for the first time, she understood something she hadn't believed before. Truth doesn't take sides. It only stands with those who dare to face it. She turned off the light, left the room, and closed the door behind her. No one knew where she went, but in her steps, there was no longer pride, only awakening. In the church, Karoline stood, lighting another candle, its glow spreading evenly through the room. She looked up at the cross, her eyes calm. One person had left the light to find their own darkness. Another stayed in the darkness to preserve light for others. And in that fragile divide, the truth stood still, belonging to no one, but shining on all. A week passed. Autumn came early to Minnesota, golden leaves swaying in the cold wind. The small street leading to the Robbinsdale church was unusually quiet, with only the sound of morning birds and a few dry leaves skittering across the road. On the black iron gate, a new white sign hung, its handwritten words simple in green paint. Faith over fear. No reporters waited. No cameras. No chatter. The sensational headlines online had vanished as quickly as they appeared. No one spoke of the Robbinsdale event, but in small towns, in coffee shops, barber shops, and bus stops, people whispered with quiet certainty. I witnessed something real. They didn't name names. They only spoke of a service where 2 women stood before an altar, and truth, not a person, not a party, was spoken. Each told the story in their own way, but one thing remained the same. It was the moment of silence when America held its breath, seeing itself in the mirror of faith. That Sunday morning, the church opened as usual. The wooden pews were wiped clean, new candles neatly placed on the altar. No tension, no lenses pointed, just ordinary people, farmers, workers, teachers, veterans, who had wept here, now returning to pray in silence. The elderly pastor stepped to the pulpit, his thin hands clutching an old Bible. He looked around, his gaze slow and warm. No one in the room stirred. When he spoke, the hoarse voice of age made everyone listen, as if for the first time. We don't need arguments to find justice, he said. We only need the courage to stand when lies enter the church. His voice carried, soft but deep. A few bowed their heads. An older man placed a hand on his chest, eyes closed. A teenager in the back row quietly clenched his fists, as if understanding something for the first time. After the service, people didn't talk much. They left in order, slowly, breathing deeply, the crisp October air. Some paused under the faith over fear sign, snapping a quick photo with their phones, not to post, but to remember. In the back row, Karoline lingered. She didn't want to leave yet. The light through the stained glass fell, casting soft golden streaks on her hair. She opened her Bible, looking at its worn pages, and smiling. No pride, no victory, just the peace of someone who had done what was right. The pastor approached, placing a hand on her shoulder. "You brought truth back here," he said. "But remember, truth needs keepers, not winners." Karoline nodded, replying softly. "I know, I didn't want to beat anyone, just to keep faith from being lost in the noise." He smiled, his eyes kind as firelight. America isn't defeated by hatred. It only weakens when people forget faith can heal. And that day, you helped them remember. She bowed her head, saying nothing more. Outside, the late sun bathed the church roof, making the white sign glow like gold. Not far away, in a small city apartment, Jasmine Crockett sat by a window. She wore a gray sweater, hair loose, no makeup, no camera lights. On the table, a cold coffee cup and a printed copy of Charlie Kirk's letter sat before her. She had read it many times that week. Each time, her heart ached differently. She took a pen, writing a line in her notebook. Sometimes, daring to be silent is also a way to tell the truth. She paused, looking out the window where sunlight touched the distant church roof. A strange peace crept into her heart. For the first time in years, she felt no need to prove anything. In Robbinsdale, the church bell rang, low and far. People nearby paused, looking up. They didn't know who rang it, but all understood its meaning. It wasn't a bell of victory, but of awakening, from division, from noise, from fear. That afternoon, a group of students stopped by. They brought small bouquets, placing them on the steps beneath the faith over fear sign. One girl whispered, "We didn't come to cry, but to remember that faith still exists." The sun sank low, bathing the church in soft orange light. From afar, it glowed like a beacon in a world still full of shadows. And in that moment, no one spoke of politics or right and wrong. They only knew that sometimes the greatest things aren't recorded in headlines or social media, but in the memories of those who saw the truth with their own eyes. And America still divided, but in this small place, people had relearned something simple. Faith doesn't fear, and truth doesn't need noise to endure. Late at night, the city sank into a thin mist, with only a few streetlights casting faint golden glows on the road to the Robbinsdale church. No one was there. The wooden door closed, but Karoline returned. She walked slowly on the stone path, holding a small candle lit from the morning service. The cold wind slipped through her hair, tugging at her thin coat. In her heart, there was no noise, only the lightness of a storm past. The church door opened, hinges creaking softly. Inside was dark, smelling of candle wax and old wood. Karoline stepped in, her candle casting broken streaks of light on the long walls. Each step stirred the air. She walked down the aisle between the pews, stopping before the altar where Charlie Kirk's photo remained, his youthful smile, eyes direct and clear as ever. She sat, gazing at the photo for a long time. The candlelight flickered, reflecting in his eyes through the glass, making them seem alive. She spoke softly, her voice low, as if talking to someone still there. "You know, Charlie, I didn't come to win. I just wanted them to hear the truth again." The wind whistled softly through the door's cracks, making the candle sway. She placed a hand on her chest, where her heart beat slowly, then smiled faintly. "You'd probably laugh if you knew about this. You always said, 'Karoline, don't argue to win words. Speak so they'll remember forever.'" She looked up, her eyes glistening in the candle's dim light. "I didn't win with words, but with truth." And Jasmine lost, not because she was defeated, but because she betrayed herself. Her words echoed softly in the quiet space, like a monologue sent into the night. No one heard, but the room seemed to understand. The candle flickered, its light catching the photo, making Charlie's face seem to smile gently. Karoline reached into her pocket for the old letter. the one she'd read to the crowd that day, trembling words of a man who chose truth as his legacy. She opened it again, reading slowly, clearly, as if to etch each word into memory. If one day I'm gone, tell them. I only wanted young people to dare to speak the truth, even if they hate hearing it. Her voice softened, trembling at the end. She folded the letter, pressed it between her hands, and placed it on the altar before Charlie's photo. The candlelight reflected on the paper, highlighting its worn creases.
You did it,
she said softly, even when you're no longer here. Outside, the autumn wind swept through, swirling around her hair. The scent of old wood, wax, and time's dust blended into a calm fragrance. Karoline sat still, eyes closed. The echoes of the past returned. The service, the tears, the mother's trembling voice, and the 5 seconds of silence that changed everything. No one spoke of politics anymore. No one asked who won or lost. Only the sense remained that, somehow, this country had reclaimed a piece of its lost soul. Karoline opened her eyes. Standing, the light through the stained glass fell on her face, blending red, gold, and blue from the small panes, like a painting of faith redrawing America's form in silence. She breathed deeply, her hand lightly touching the photo's frame. America doesn't need loud voices, she said, her voice firm and soft as a breath. Only those who speak the truth. She turned, walking away without looking back. Her heels echoed softly on the wooden floor, blending with the crackle of the candle. The light behind her danced, but each step toward the door made it fade, grow smaller. At the threshold, she paused. Before her was the night sky, full of stars, unusually calm. The wind carried the scent of dry leaves and cold earth. She looked up, where Minnesota's sky stretched endlessly. Each star was a spark, like small souls guarding the truth she'd defended. Behind, in the church, the candle on the altar still burned, its small, steady flame held against the wind through the door's cracks. The light fell on the letter, making its words gleam. I only wanted young people to dare to speak the truth. Karoline closed the door, letting the candle burn in the dark. She stepped down the stairs, hands in her coat pockets, the wind brushing her shoulders, carrying the rustle of leaves. Down the small slope, streetlights cast gold on the dew-wet road. She walked straight, neither fast nor slow, each step steady like a calm heartbeat. In her heart, there was no image of the confrontation, no echo of arguments. Only one thing remained, the truth. It wasn't loud, wasn't dazzling, just stood quietly, glowing softly like that candle, and she knew, as long as someone kept lighting it, it would never go out. Far off, a strong wind swept through the trees, leaves scattering wildly, then settling. Karoline paused in the empty street, looking up at the sky, the full moon high, shining silver over everything. She smiled, a small smile, enough to warm the night. Thank you, she whispered, as if speaking to the wind, for teaching me that speaking the truth doesn't need power, only courage. She kept walking. The sound of her footsteps faded, then vanished. Behind her, the church stood silent in the autumn night. Within it, the candle still burned, its quiet light illuminating Charlie Kirk's photo, the smile in the picture reflecting the flame, warm and clear, like the soul of someone who had never truly gone. And that night, as the city slept, in the small Robbinsdale church, there was only silence. But it wasn't emptiness. It was the silence of peace, the silence of a truth, spoken and destined to be remembered, not through shouts, but through the memories of those who witnessed it. Somewhere among the stars, perhaps Charlie was smiling. America remained divided, but the candle in that church proved that faith endured, and truth lived on. The story Jasmine Crockett walks into a church, mocks Charlie Kirk as hateful. Then Karoline Leavitt ends her career in 5 Sex is not just a confrontation between two women, but a profound metaphor for modern America, where the line between truth and prejudice grows fragile, and where justice is sometimes found in silence, rather than shouts. From the moment Jasmine stepped into the church and mocked the departed, to when Karoline held up Charlie Kirk's letter and said, "You call him hateful, but you brought hatred here today." The story reveals how words, without sincerity, can become weapons of self-destruction. Charlie's letter, "I only wanted young people to dare to speak the truth, even if they hate hearing it," is the pivotal detail, not only turning the tide, but illuminating the core value of free speech. Speaking truth isn't about winning, but healing. The image of Charlie's mother standing in the church, confirming the letter, making the entire room erupt. That was the moment the America in this story awoke, realizing that compassion is stronger than any argument. The conclusion, Karoline returning to the church late at night, saying, "America doesn't need loud voices. Only those who speak the truth," is a reminder to its citizens and leaders. This country cannot be led by anger or hatred, but only by honesty and moral courage. The lesson left is simple. When people dare to listen instead of shout, America is truly strong, not because of power, but because it holds on to its soul. Thank you for joining us in this story of faith, courage, and the power of truth. Please subscribe to the channel to not miss the next stories, where America continues to be illuminated by those who dare to speak what is right, even when facing the darkness.